All right, hello everyone. My name is Thaddeus LaCourciere. I'm the Planetarium educator at the Bell Museum. I would be coming to you live for this event. Unfortunately, we've run into some technical difficulties with Facebook and Zoom working together. So we are recording this to post it later on our Facebook page where I think you're watching it now. Today, we're going to be exploring the history of our space program and some of what it has taken to get us to the point where next week on the 27th, American astronauts will be launching from US soil again for the first time in 9 years on a historic SpaceX mission. To take you through some of this, our Planetarium Programs Coordinator, Sarah Komprud, will be taking over. And unfortunately, because this is not live, we can't be taking your questions right now, but we are looking forward to all of you leaving your questions in the comments for us to be able to answer later. So Sarah, if you want to take it away.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad you could join us this morning in a slightly different fashion than we originally had planned. But how many of you know about the historic launch happening next week? Like Tad said, next Wednesday will be the first launch of astronauts from US soil since the retiring of the space station 9 years ago. And on top of that, it's historic because it'll be the first crewed launch using a commercial vehicle, which means a rocket and spacecraft not built by NASA. We'll talk a little bit more about that launch coming up shortly. But first, let's go back in time to another historic launch that changed the world. So Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. These three men took a historic journey to the moon. But why did they go? Why in July of 1969 did these three men risk their lives on top of a rocket and spend 8 days traveling over 500,000 miles? Well, the story starts with a little metal beach ball. In 1957, the Soviet Union space program surprised the world with the first object ever to orbit the Earth, the Sputnik satellite. About the size of a beach ball, it orbited around the Earth about once every hour and a half. Although it only beeped, it marked the beginning of the space race and an escalation between the Soviet Union and the United States of America. The Soviets followed Sputnik with the first animal ever to orbit the Earth, Laika the dog. And they extended their space dominance with Luna 1, the first spacecraft to escape Earth's gravity, fly beyond the moon, and send us our first close-up images of the lunar surface. And in 1961, the Soviets leapt ahead when they sent cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin to space, just weeks before NASA's first planned space flight by Alan Shepard in Project Mercury. As the Soviets continued to outpace NASA, the US needed a big, bold idea, and it came from Robert Gilruth, head of the manned space program and native of Minnesota. He grew up in Duluth and earned degrees in aeronautical engineering from the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. Gilruth told President John F. Kennedy,
"So, well, you've got to pick a job that's so difficult that it's new, that they'll have to start from scratch. They just can't take their old rocket and put another gimmick on it and do something we can't do. It's got to be something that requires a great big rocket, like going to the moon."
And on May 25th, 1961, the president proposed this plan in his famous speech before Congress. Gilruth and his task force were excited and a little more than overwhelmed at the idea of having to accomplish this monumental endeavor before the end of the decade. It took NASA many steps to make the leap to the moon. The Mercury 7 were NASA's first space travelers. They captured the excitement of the world in their snazzy silver spacesuits. The successes and failures of Project Mercury helped NASA refine its physical and psychological training for astronauts. And over time, NASA learned about the dangers and unpredictable situations their astronauts would face. Following Project Mercury were the Gemini missions, all leading up to the Apollo program. But Apollo's first steps were here on Earth. They tested new spacecraft and systems powerful enough to go to the moon. Astronauts, like the crew of Apollo 1, used state-of-the-art testing facilities to practice complex ocean recovery procedures. Engineers also tested the Lunar Excursion Module, or the LEM, which would take astronauts to the moon's surface. But 6 months after that photo in the pool was taken, one of the worst tragedies in NASA's short history happened. On January 27th, 1967, the crew of Apollo 1 died in a fire on the launch pad. Commander Pilot Virgil Gus Grisham, Senior Pilot Ed White, and Pilot Roger V. Chaffee The deaths of these three men shocked NASA and America, as we lost three national heroes. NASA stopped crewed launches for almost 2 years and went over the spacecraft with a fine-tooth comb. Immediately following the fire, Flight Director Gene Kranz stated 2 requirements for mission control: being tough and being competent. Being tough means they would forever be accountable for what they do or what they failed to do. Incompetent meaning they would never take anything for granted. Being tough and competent became fundamental principles at NASA, and they have been a cornerstone of the design and testing process ever since. These 3 principles also helped shape the next uncrewed test flights. NASA made changes to insulation and cabin materials and the composition of the air in the spacecraft to prevent the same failure from ever happening again. After over 20 uncrewed test flights, Apollo was ready to take astronauts safely into space once again. Apollo had 4 major missions before landing on the moon. Apollo 7 here was the first manned mission following the Apollo 1 disaster, and the first 3-person American space mission. In orbit, they tested the new command service module and conducted NASA's first live TV broadcast. Apollo 8 were the first crew to fly to the moon. They scouted landing sites from orbit, and they were the first ever to see the moon's far side and view the entire Earth at once. Apollo 9 stayed a little bit closer to home. Here we can see David Scott on the right performing a spacewalk over the ocean. This mission tested the life support backpack and confirmed the LEM was ready. And Apollo 10 was the final dress rehearsal. They practiced the approach to the moon, and they came within 10 miles of the lunar surface. But as their mission dictated, they returned to orbit and headed home. With the success of Apollo 10, Apollo 11 was ready. The target of the Apollo program was 250,000 miles away, the moon. And on the morning of July 16, 1969, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins went down to Launch Pad 39A in Cape Canaveral, Florida. They rode the elevator up the 36-story launch tower, and one by one, they climbed into their tiny command module. They went through their checklists, communicated with ground control, and they were ready to go. 4 days after launch, the LEM with Armstrong and Aldrin on board touched down on the lunar surface.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Neil Armstrong's one small step was from the lunar lander onto the moon. And mankind's one giant leap was the amazing achievement of 400,000 women and men, scientists, engineers, technicians, and support staff who put those men on the moon. The world celebrated, and we celebrated here in Minnesota. The front pages of the Minneapolis Tribune and St. Paul Pioneer Press were covered with Apollo news. And while the race to the moon was driven by politics, it wasn't the only reason we went. While on the moon, the astronauts carried out experiments and collected samples from the surface. In total, astronauts collected and brought back 842 pounds of lunar materials we're still studying today. And the knowledge we gained from those lunar samples and the technology we created for the entire Apollo program changed the world. And even though we haven't sent humans to the moon for 47 years, we're continuing to explore. Since the Apollo program, over 500 astronauts have flown in space, though they only reach as far as low Earth orbit, a few hundred miles above the ground. And right now, NASA is training the next generation of astronauts who will explore space, but in a different way than before. NASA is working with private companies who are building their own rockets and crew vehicles that the astronauts will use to get to the International Space Station. And just like before, being tough and being competent are still cornerstones of the human spaceflight program. Sending humans to space and safely returning them to Earth remain fundamentals for NASA as they work with private companies who designed and built these new spaceflight vehicles. One of the crew members for the Boeing Starliner mission is Josh Cassada, who grew up right here in White Bear Lake, Minnesota. Josh joined NASA after training as a test pilot, flying combat and humanitarian missions, earning his PhD in physics, and starting his own company, just not all at the same time. All of that experience will come in handy when he pilots the Boeing Starliner to the ISS with Commander Sonny Williams, which is expected to launch later this year. But next week, the focus is on SpaceX. and it will be the first launch of the Crew Dragon vehicle with astronauts on board. This first launch of astronauts from U.S. soil since the space shuttle retired in 2011. But why is launching from U.S. soil so important? Well, since 2011, the U.S. has been contracting with the Russian space program to send and return astronauts to the ISS. So by returning launches home, we can send astronauts to space more regularly, reliably, and for a lower cost. Next week's mission will be crewed by NASA astronauts Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken. They will arrive in style to the launch pad, driving Tesla Model X SUVs, to that same launch pad that Apollo 11 launched from, pad 39A. Behnken and Hurley were part of the astronaut class of 2000. Together, they have logged over 1,300 hours in space, Behnken having completed 3 spacewalks, and Hurley piloting 2 space shuttle missions, including that last one in 2011. In 2018, they were selected for this mission for their extensive test pilot and flight experience, including their experiences in space. And they've also been advisors on the design of the commercial vehicles since 2015. Behnken and Hurley will spend anywhere from 30 to 119 days at the ISS. NASA and SpaceX have not yet decided exactly how long this mission will last. The duration of the mission will depend on the state of the Crew Dragon capsule while it's in orbit. And this mission will be a historic milestone for human spaceflight. The mission's objective is certification for future missions to the ISS and beyond. Next week's launch is a full test from launch to landing for SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket and the Crew Dragon vehicle. All of this is to prepare for returning to the moon by 2024 with the Artemis program. By turning over low Earth orbit transportation to commercial companies, NASA can use its resources to focus on Artemis and establishing a permanent human presence on the moon, just like our permanent presence on the ISS. And beyond Artemis, the goal is to send humans to Mars in the next few decades. So watch for the historic launch next Wednesday. The backup date is Saturday, May 30th, should the weather or another reason prevent the launch from happening on Wednesday. Then you can say you were watching when this historic mission was made. So thank you all for watching. We did get a few questions previous to our technology failure. And so a few of the questions that came in were, one, how many people in total have ever been to the moon? Well, 12 people have landed on the moon. Those were from the Apollo missions 11 through 17. But 12 others flew to the moon but didn't land. So that would have started with Apollo 8, their first mission to orbit the moon and send back detailed photos, all the way through that last mission of Apollo 17. And another question that we've gotten in the past is, what does it take to become an astronaut? Well, it's only a few things. One is to be a U.S. citizen. And number 2, you should possess a master's degree in a STEM field. So if you're going to school for engineering or science, or even computer science, or math, that would be all great things to do. You have to have at least 2 years of professional experiences after finishing your degree, or at least 1,000 hours of pilot in command time on a jet aircraft. So a lot of the astronauts are actually fighter pilots. And last but not least, you have to be able to pass NASA's long duration flight astronaut physical. So you do have to be physically fit and ready to go for long missions on the ISS. So thank you all for joining us this morning, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
All right. Thank you, Sarah, for that amazing look into a tiny bit of the history of the Apollo program and what's coming up next week. If you can't tell, I'm very excited about this launch. It is going to be so cool to see this happen. I don't remember too well. I was around in 2011. I don't remember those shuttle launches too well. I unfortunately was not around 51 years ago for Apollo 1. So this is, for me at least, as someone working in the space education industry, this is a really exciting moment. And if you weren't personally around for our One Giant Leap 51 years ago, there is a way that you can watch it yourself. We will be posting a 360 video of a recreation of that launch and the landing on the moon. Excuse me. So keep an eye on our Facebook page and our website for how to watch that video yourself. And keep an eye on the news next Wednesday, the 27th. we will be watching history happen again. So keep an eye out for that as well.